On Wednesday, Senator Ted Cruz joined several of his Republican colleagues to demand an end to the COVID-19 vaccine mandate on military personnel. Cruz claimed that the mandate was due to an effort by the Biden administration to purge conservatives from the ranks of the military. He insisted that the mandate be lifted in order to secure support for the NDAA. Republicans have long opposed the vaccine mandates supported and imposed by the Biden administration. Cruz has taken his opposition much further by making this unfounded accusation against the Democratic president.
There's no responsibility Congress has that is more important than standing up to the fighting men and women of our military. What Joe Biden and this administration are doing to our military is wrong. It is immoral. Throughout the state of Texas, I've heard from soldiers, I've heard from sailors, I've heard from airmen, I've heard from Marines, I've heard from Coast Guardsmen being terminated because they made a decision not to get the COVID vaccine. That ought to be your individual choice. If you choose to get the vaccine, that's your choice. That's your right. You can make that choice. But if you choose not to get the COVID vaccine, that should also be your choice. That should also be your right. The Biden administration has fired thousands of active duty men and women, and the numbers vary. We've heard numbers from 3,400 to over 10,000. The truth of the matter is, we have no idea because the Biden administration refuses to answer the question. We do know that this past year was the worst recruiting year in the last 50 years in the U.S. Army. We know that our readiness, our strength to defend ourselves has been weakened dramatically due to Joe Biden's mistreatment of the fighting men and women. And we also know the world has gotten more and more dangerous. We've had a disgraceful surrender to the Taliban in Afghanistan, and we're in the middle of the first major land war in Europe since World War II. Our obligation is to defend the fighting men and women of the military, and so I'm standing with my colleagues. I believe we will have 41 Republicans who say, we will not vote to take up the NDAA unless this body votes on protecting the servicemen and women. In May of this year, I introduced legislation, the Americans Act, that would prohibit the Biden administration from terminating or taking adverse action against any serviceman or woman because of his or her decision not to take the vaccine. It would also provide an avenue for people who have been dismissed to be reinstated if they choose to be reinstated in the military, and it would protect religious liberty. This administration is sitting on or declining religious liberty exemptions by the thousands. I believe the Senate should vote on the Americans Act that I introduced in May to protect the servicemen and women. This is a common sense position. When you talk to Navy SEALs, as I have, who spent years and even decades training and fighting to defend this nation, right now they're being fired for a political agenda. Let me make a final point. One of the reasons I believe that President Biden and Vice President Harris are pushing through this policy is that I believe they're doing this as an effort to purge from the military conservatives. Purge from the military people who don't agree with their political agenda. I think they're using it as an excuse from the enlisted level all the way up to the majors and colonels to the top brass. If you're concerned about the perils of a woke military, if you're concerned about the Biden Defense Department instructing servicemen and women no longer use pronouns, never mind defending our nation, we're focused on our political priorities. This is intricately interwoven with the policy of trying to throw out the military anyone who dares disagree. It ought to be your body and your choice whether you get the vaccine, and we should stand together and support the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and Coast Guardsmen who are defending this nation.
One final